I opened the nightstand drawer, the one he always kept shut. Inside, there was a one-way ticket to Miami and a single strand of long, honey blonde hair. Not mine. My fingers touched the edge of his wallet, but couldn't pull it free. My chest tightened, like wet cement had been poured between my ribs and left to dry. No note, no explanation. Only this, the silence that comes after a dream has been erased. What if your retirement dreams were never yours to begin with, but his to spend when the time felt right? Her name was Virginia Cole. She was 68 years old and had lived most of her life in a cedarwood house off Lake Lanier, in the quiet outskirts of Gainesville, Georgia. The house smelled of pine in summer and firewood in winter. Eugene, her husband of 50 years, said the place reminded him of stability. Virginia thought it felt more like a memory that refused to fade. They had just celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. Eugene, now 72, still wore crisp shirts and polished his own shoes every Sunday. He was a retired corporate accountant, the kind of man who knew how to stretch a dollar, how to plan a future, and how to keep numbers close to the chest. Virginia had spent her working life as a conservation aide for the State Park Services. She liked being outdoors. She liked silence. The marriage worked. In its own quiet rhythm, he managed the bills and bank accounts, and she managed the garden and the house. When Eugene began talking about moving to Florida, she thought it was just another one of his post-retirement fantasies. He said the warm weather would be good for his joints, and maybe they could buy a small home near Palm Coast. Virginia hesitated. Her roots were here, but she didn't argue. She never did. A month before their anniversary, he made comments in passing about transferring funds, locking in interest rates, having meetings with brokers. "Let me handle it," he told her gently, like always. She nodded, trusting the man who had managed their money for 5 decades. On the night of their celebration, he stood beside her as their children and grandchildren toasted to 50 years of togetherness. Someone took a photograph of them holding hands beneath string lights. That photo still hangs on the living room wall. The next morning, Eugene told her he was flying to Florida to finalize the down payment. He kissed her cheek and said he'd be back in 3 days. He packed a small suitcase, left the garage door open, and drove away in the silver sedan they had shared since 2007. On the 4th day, his phone went to voicemail. On the 5th, the bank called. Virginia stood barefoot in the kitchen when the woman on the line said the joint savings account had been emptied 2 days earlier. She blinked. "But I didn't approve any withdrawal," she whispered. The woman paused, then explained, "Your name is not on the account." "Ma'am, only Mr. Cole's." That was when she drove to the local branch office. The teller there, a younger woman with blue nails and a tight ponytail, looked at her with practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said. "We can't share those records unless you're an authorized party." Virginia returned home, moving slowly. She opened the drawer Eugene used to keep locked. Inside were things he didn't expect her to find. A one-way ticket to Miami, a hotel receipt billed to his name and next to it, a name she didn't recognize, a woman's name, younger. The receipt was dated the day after their anniversary. There was also a gold money clip she had given him in 1986. It was empty. She didn't cry. Her body moved as if underwater. She walked into the bedroom and sat at the edge of the mattress. Her heart didn't ache. It stiffened. I didn't know what day it was. The ceiling fan hummed above me, and I couldn't remember if I'd turned it on. Her fingers trembled when she tried to call him. She let it ring until the sound became a kind of noise in the air, like distant wind chimes you couldn't place. She didn't hang up. She didn't speak. She just listened. Then she said it aloud, her first words since realizing the truth. "We lived 50 years together, and I never had the right to know what he kept in his hand." That night, she lay awake replaying every dinner, Every bank visit she hadn't attended, every document she hadn't asked to see, the habit of silence, the comfort of delegation. She had let him carry the numbers, and now he had carried them away. The weight of the betrayal did not come from what he did with the money. It came from how easy it was for him to disappear without needing her signature, without even needing her name. It had not been a spontaneous act. It had been built quietly, like termites inside the walls. She was looking at the final page of something he had written alone. In the days that followed, Virginia's world narrowed to three things: a photo on the wall, a locked bank account, and a silence that sat like dust on every surface. Her neighbors asked if Eugene was still traveling. She nodded. She didn't know what else to say. To everyone else, it looked like a retirement plan delayed. To her, it was the closing chapter of decades of deception. What she had thought was partnership had turned out to be possession. What she had believed was love had aged into a marital betrayal so complete. It had erased her from the paperwork of her own life, but not from her memory, not from the stillness of her garden, not from the truth that had finally come home to her, even if he never would. There is a quiet lie many women carry for decades. It sounds like this: if we're married, everything must be shared. That lie is soft, almost invisible. It hides behind years of habit and compromise. But it is not true. Legally, emotionally, and financially, it is dangerously untrue. The core of Virginia's story is not about a bank account. It is about the belief that love replaces paperwork, that loyalty is enough to secure your place in a life you helped build. But in the eyes of the law, love means very little unless your name is written beside his. Eugene didn't steal in the way a stranger might. What he did was far more personal. He used trust like a tool. He positioned himself, over time, as the sole handler of money. He normalized her silence, praised her for not asking questions, wrapped control in the language of protection. That is what makes marital betrayal so painful. It disguises itself as devotion. Virginia never thought to check the account because she had never needed to. For decades, he paid the bills, filed the taxes, and reassured her that everything was under control. And perhaps, for a time, it was, until the day it wasn't. That is the danger of blind faith. It holds until it breaks. And when it breaks completely. Some might ask, why didn't she put her name on the account? But questions like that miss the real point. This was not a story of one bad decision. It was a structure built over years, subtle patterns, gentle exclusions, a quiet agreement never spoken aloud but always understood. The money was his to move because the system had been designed that way from the beginning. When Virginia met with a legal aid counselor, she learned something that should unsettle anyone listening. In most U.S. states, a jointly earned savings can be entirely controlled by one spouse if the account is held in that spouse's name alone. That means 50 years of shared life can disappear with a single wire transfer, and the law may not recognize your loss unless you can prove foul play or file for divorce. She hadn't even known the account wasn't joint. No bank ever asked. No letter ever arrived. No alert was sent. Her name had never been there to begin with. That is how marriage secrets revealed themselves, not in grand confessions, but in cold, institutional silence. The bank didn't betray her. Her husband did, but it took the bank to show her what she had never been allowed to see. In the end, the betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was legal. It was total. And it left her with a single, terrible truth. If you are not written into the foundation, you can be erased from the ending. Virginia did not stay in that house by the lake. After the silence grew too heavy and the air too thin, she sold it, not out of grief, but out of clarity. She used the remaining funds from her personal retirement account, the only one bearing her name, and moved to a small town called Flat Rock in North Carolina. It had hills, a quiet library, and a community center where people still wrote letters by hand. She found a ground-floor apartment near a trail. Every morning, she took walks with a cane made from driftwood, one she sanded herself, in the woodworking class she joined at the senior center. There, she met women who had also started over. Some wore rings, some didn't. None of them asked where her husband was. What healed her was not revenge. It was routine. Cutting soft wood, running her fingers over smooth grain, listening to a kettle whistle, knowing the water would boil whether or not anyone else came home. She began keeping a journal, not of emotions, but of facts. What accounts had her name? What documents she had copies of? Who her medical proxy was? She created a binder, color-coded, and showed it to her daughter during lunch one Sunday. Her daughter cried when she saw it, not from sadness, but from something else. Recognition, relief, maybe even pride. Virginia never spoke Eugene's name again. She filed no charges. There was nothing to recover. He had moved states, changed numbers, and left no forwarding address. But his absence no longer defined her days. Instead, she started helping others. Once a month, she volunteered at a local legal aid clinic, not as a lawyer, but as a witness. She told her story plainly. She brought copies of forms. She sat beside women holding envelopes they hadn't dared to open. She spoke slowly, letting each word fall into place like a stone in a new foundation. One afternoon, a woman asked her, "How did you start over at 68? Virginia looked at her and said, "I didn't start over. I continued. But this time, I made sure I existed on paper. For those listening, that was more than advice. It was a warning, a map, a reminder that your name must live where your money does, where your wishes do if you want them to remain yours. And for those still clinging to silence, hoping love will protect them from loss," she offered, "only this retirement dreams are not protected by years alone. They are protected by names, documents, questions asked before it is too late. So ask, open the file cabinet, call the bank, look for your name, not as someone's wife, but as the person who earned, saved, and built a life that deserves to be legally seen. If this story reminds you of someone, say it. Write a comment, leave a sentence for the woman who is still too afraid to check the balance on an account she never opened. You don't need to explain. Just write the first line. That is where the truth begins.